friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome to day 16 of my 2023 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Christmas Eve and Snow Play stamp sets. I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Cartabella Christmas Flora Peaceful collection. So I'm going to tear out a sheet to use as my color inspiration and tuck that under my cardstock panel. I'm coloring with my Copic markers and I'm starting with my reindeer. I chose some light golden brown shades to try to match the centers of some of those flowers. They're a little bit more yellow toned, but I wanted to just tie into that a little bit, so that's why I am pulling out these particular shades of Copics. I'm using E50, E51, E53, and E55. Since these reindeer are quite large images, I am going to color them just one at a time. So I'm starting with the one on the left and laying in some shadows with that E55 at the top of the head and the top of the ears, along the left side of the face since it is turned toward the right, but then on the right side of the rest of the body since it is turned toward the left. Then once I have those shadows laid in, I'm going to start to blend them out with the E53, just bringing that color forward on each of those places, making sure to go over the edge of the previous shade so that I get a nice smooth blend, because I want this to look like fur. I want it to be soft and fuzzy, so I'm trying to eliminate any harsh lines. Once I have the E53 laid in, I'm going to fill in most of the rest of the body with the E51. I'm just going to save a little bit of the E50 for some of the transition areas because I do plan to leave a little bit of white in a few little places. So like the chest and the neck area, I wanted to leave some white there. And then of course the belly, and then also on the tail and the front of the face, right around the muzzle. So that's where I'll bring in that E50 to kind of just transition into that white area so it isn't quite so stark. And then I'll also add a little bit of E51 and E50 around the eye. And then I'm going to grab the colorless blender and just go over the edge of that E50 to smooth that out into that white space. I also added just a touch of the E50 on the belly area back under the hindquarters, and then I'm going to move on to my second deer, which I guess is actually the male. I don't know if you guys have heard this. I recently read this somewhere, but the reindeer that have antlers at Christmas are actually all female. So all of Santa's reindeer, including Rudolph, are female. So Santa's sleigh is pulled by women, you guys. I couldn't believe it when I read this, but apparently both male and female reindeer have antlers. But then in the fall, when they have their mating season, the males use them to fight with each other, obviously. And then after that is done, they cast their antlers off. So by the time Christmas actually rolls around, the only reindeer that still have antlers are the girls. So Santa's sleigh is pulled by all women, you guys, which kind of makes complete sense when you think about it, because it's usually the women who are hustling to make Christmas happen and get all the gifts. And I know my husband, sometimes he'll even give me my own gifts in boxes and I'm supposed to wrap them. He is a wonderful man, but he just does not do all of those things. It's just not his thing. And I enjoy it. So it's totally fine. I'm also the one that plans the entire meal and, buys all the presents except for my own. And, so makes total sense to me. And I actually Googled this and found several sources that said that it was true. So there you go. The girl is on the left here and the boy is on the right. So I'm using E44 and E47 to color in those antlers and their hooves. So just the two shades because the area is super tiny and even one shade probably would have been enough, but I went ahead and squeezed in 2 just so we had a little bit of a shadow toward the back of the foot and the base of the antlers. And then I'm going to add in some rosy cheeks with R00 and R20, and also color in the insides of their ears. I felt like the ears especially was a little bit too bright, so I am going to add in a 3rd shade here in just a minute. Super pale shade just to kind of soften it into the rest of the fur color on that inside of the ear. I'm going to use R000. And then I'm going to go back to my R20 and just give my little cardinals some rosy cheeks. You can either do it before or after you color in critters, so I just went ahead and did it while I had those colors out. Then for the rest of the cardinal, I'm going to use R22, R24, and R29. Normally I pick a little bit darker reds because I like to have a lot of contrast, but I am trying to match that pattern paper, and it does have more of like a coral red tone to it. So I decided to use these shades, and I think they were a really good match for it. So the R29 is going to be my darkest, and that's what I'm using for my shadows on both of these little guys. And then I'll blend that out with the R24 and then fill in with the R22. I also colored in their beaks with the R24 since cardinals do have red beaks. And I absolutely love these images. These 2 little cardinals are probably 2 of my absolute favorite images of all time. I just adore them. I don't know what it is about the way they're drawn. I just think they are the sweetest ever. For their black faces, I'm going to use T3 and T5. And once again, I felt like it was still a little bit dark because I wanted to make sure you can really see their eyes. So I added in a touch of T1 as well. And then I'm going to move on to the ribbons on my reindeer's necks. And I'm going to use some greens to pull out the greens in that pattern paper. I'm using G40, G43, and G46 for that. Putting that darkest shade in the center of the bow where the fabric would be gathered and knotted, and also right behind the bow on the part that goes around the neck because the bow would cast a shadow there. And then blending out with the G43, and then using a little bit of that G40, which is nice and bright, which really adds a nice little bit of highlight to that combo. Then I'm going to take a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and get that started off to the side. Mine is really crusty and dry, so it takes a couple tries to get it going. I'll go over the eyes of my cardinals first because they're super tiny, and then I'll go over the eyes of my reindeer just to make them nice and bright and shiny. I think this really livens up your images. And then I'm going to take a white Sakura Jelly Roll pen and just go over the dots on the deer's hindquarters because it was a little bit tricky to color around them and I didn't do a great job of doing that. So this is just going to make them nice and bright and white again. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. So for my background today, I'm actually going to do a very simple hand-colored background using more of my Copic markers. I'm going to use BG70 and BG72, and the first thing I did was just draw in a little bit of a snowdrift with that BG72, and now I am filling in the space above that line. That is going to be my sky. So I started flicking in some BG72. And then I'm going to do some tip-to-tip action, picking up some of that BG72 with the BG70 marker and scrubbing that over the edge to try to soften it because these 2 shades don't blend that well together simply because that BG70 is so very pale. It is a barely there shade. I actually really like it. It works great for things like glass or fairies' wings. But it's just a little bit tricky to blend. So that's why I usually have to do the tip to tip with these 2 shades. It's also looking more streaky than usual because my BG70 is really low. I need to refill that marker. I need to do a whole day of marker maintenance. I just haven't had a chance with the holiday card series going on. I did try taking off the back cap and using the chisel end, which I never do, but I was just trying to get more ink out there on the paper because I didn't want to have to stop and refill in the middle of filming the video. So I just made it work for now, but I will definitely refill that marker before I use it again because it is really, really empty. But for the sake of this video, it really doesn't matter because most of that background is going to get covered up. So even though it does look streaky, you're not going to barely see very much of it. So I am also just deepening up the bottom edge there where the snow is supposed to start. And then I brought some of that BG70 into the snow to give a little bit of a shadow there because I want it to be an evening scene or towards evening. So I just wanted to have a little bit more of that softer gray blue undertone, gray aqua blue. I don't even know how to describe that color, but I do love it. I'm just checking with the die that I'm going to be used to trimming this out to make sure I have enough color there. And I do think that these markers are a good match for the background shade in that pattern paper. So now I'm going to bring in BG75, which is just a shade darker from the BG72, and I'm going to start doing some little scribbly trees. This is so simple to do, you guys. And I purposely started my first one off the edge where I knew I wouldn't need to use it to kind of just have like a practice run because it has been a really long time since I have done one of these trees. I think it's been at least, well, since last year. But yeah, they're super fun to do actually once you get going and so easy. I promise there's like barely any technique to this. All you do is draw a straight up and down line and then you scribble side to side, making the scribbles go wider as you come down toward the base. And there's really no technique to it. You can, add to it, you can take away, you can layer on top of each other if you want to. If your line isn't perfectly straight to begin with, that's totally fine too. It's really hard to screw this up, and because my images are actually going to go in front of most of this, you're not going to see that much of these trees anyway. It's just going to serve as a little bit of scene building for the background. So I just made sure to vary the size of the trees that I did so that they wouldn't all be identical. I wanted to have some higher and lower and even a little bit of a gap between some of them. I decided that I didn't really like that first one that I did as the practice, so I'm going to do one more on this end so that I can shift that die a little bit more toward the right hand side of this scene. So once I have that done, I will take that die, which is one of the Hello Bluebird nesting circles, and I'm just going to line it up where I want and then cut that out using my die cutting machine. And then I actually decided that I wanted to have a little bit of snow on these trees because I'm going to be doing a snowy scene. So again, I used the one that was not going to be on my background as a practice round. And I'm just taking a white gel pen and scribbling over the top of it once again. Not quite as much as the scribbles that I did for the trees because I don't want to cover it up completely, but I just want it to look like there's some snow settling on those branches. So I'm literally just scribbling back and forth, making some little curly cues and lines. And, just trying not to think about it too much. If I think about it too much, then I'm like, oh, that looks terrible. But I promise you, once you get your images over top, it's going to look fine. People might even think it looks great. I mean, you'll have to tell me what you think in the comments. But I really don't think it ended up looking bad once the images were over top because it's going to push those trees into the background anyway. And it's just a fun technique that I don't do that often. Maybe I should do a little bit more often, but anyway, there's how that's looking. So I'll set that aside and we'll move on to our pattern paper pad. I'm going to pull out another print to match with that beautiful floral. I wanted to go soft, so I decided to pull out this pink print with tiny, tiny Christmas trees all over it. And then I'll also be using 2 other pieces of pattern paper that are just solid prints in that pattern paper pad. One is going to be this red piece here, but it is going to be a perfect match because it is from that same pattern paper pack. I'm going to treat this little scrap with my Rabbit Hole Designs powder tool so I can stamp a sentiment on there and then heat emboss it. I'm going to stamp in Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink that works great for embossing because it grips a hold of that powder and holds it into place while you are heat setting it. So I stamped that down twice to make sure that it would be nice and bold. And then I'm going to coat that in some white embossing powder. This is Lawn Fawn white embossing powder. I just keep it in this big tub because I use it most often. And then I will bring my heat gun to that. I like to heat it off to the side for about 30 seconds to a minute. And then I bring it to both the back and the front so that it kind of eliminates some of the warping that you might have, especially with the pattern paper because it is a bit thinner than cardstock. Then I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI, which is Lawn Fawn Ballet Slippers cardstock. I'm stamping in Lawn Fawn bubblegum ink. I'm doing another one of the reindeer from this stamp set, and then the sentiment says, "For my dear friend at Christmas." And I also included a couple of snowflakes. So now I'm ready to start assembling. I'm going to add in my pretty pattern paper first, the one with the poinsettia print all over it. I cut that down to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so it is going to fit the entire front of my A2 standard size card. And then once I have that on there, I'll take the little pink print with the white Christmas trees and run that across the center. Again, just making sure that those edges are on there nice and straight. And then I brought in that focal panel, and that's when I kind of realized that it wasn't popping quite enough for me on that busy pattern paper. So I decided to die cut a dark green piece from that pattern paper pack and die cut that with the next size up of the nesting circles from Hello Bluebird, just to add a little bit of a frame around it, which I think helped immensely. So I glued those together, and then I lined the back of that with some foam tape so I could pop it up, give it a bit of dimension on the card, and then I'm going to just make sure that that is centered, making sure I have the same amount of that pink pattern paper on both the left and the right side there, and then I'll press that down into place, and I can bring in my images. So I also have my sentiment that I just trimmed down into a thin strip. I want to add that down at the bottom first to make sure I have enough room for it and don't end up, gluing it over my reindeer's feet or anything like that. So I'm just going to line that up down at the bottom of the circle and glue that into place. And then I'll bring in those 2 little reindeer and arrange them on the scene. I know that they're going to have to overlap just slightly, so I wanted to lay them out and see how I wanted them to look before I glued them down permanently. I decided to put this little boy reindeer on the top left of the scene, and then the little girl reindeer is going to go on the bottom right, and just their ears are going to overlap. But I think that ended up looking cute. It makes them look like they are kind of interacting and hanging out together. And then between them on the ground, I wanted to have a little pop of red, so I'm going to adhere one of these sweet little cardinals. And I tucked the bottom of its feet under that sentiment strip just to kind of incorporate it into the scene a little bit more. And then because it was looking up, I kind of decided that it might look cute to have the second cardinal perched on the male reindeer's back. So that's what I decided to do. I just thought it would be a little bit whimsical to have him up there, and then they're kind of like looking at each other from the distance, which I thought was kind of sweet. So I adhered those, and then I wanted to add a bit of like footprints to the snow. So I went back to my 2 shades that I'd used for my snow and my sky. I'm going to add a little kind of mark with the BG72 first, and then I'll blend that out with the BG70, so it'll make it look like, they've kind of walked through the snow and left these little impressions there. I think that adds a lot to the scene as well, to just add in those little tiny details. Next, I wanted to add in some snow, so I'm using my Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. I'm going to add a little spritz of water to the cap and try to mix up some paint in there just to make it a bit more fluid, because my bottle is a couple years old and so it has dried out a bit. Not terrible, but I just want it to be a little bit more of a fluid consistency. So I'm just adding until I have a mix that I like. And then I'm going to take this little dotting tool, which I did get questions about in the last video when I used it. It's just a nail art tool. It's literally called a dotting tool. If you look them up, you can usually find them in like packs of 4 or 5 in different colors. The color doesn't matter. It's usually, that means that there's a different size little end to it. This one also has 2 different sizes, so I do kind of flip it over and go back and forth so that I can have some little bigger snowflakes and some smaller ones. But yeah, it's just a very inexpensive tool. We actually use these in the pottery shop there where I work for painting little dots on things, or like little glints in eyes and stuff like that. So I'm very familiar with using them. But yeah, I'm just going to go back and forth and add snow all over until I have a look that I like, making sure to go over my little critters as well, because we want the snow to look like it's falling in front of them and not just behind them. It's supposed to be all around. So I just try not to go over the important features like the eyes or the mouth or something like that, or like the beak of the birds, because that would totally obscure them, you know. But just over the head or the wing or the hindquarters, stuff like that. And also making sure to add it to the sky. Then I am going to add in a bit of sparkle with some Stardust Stickles. I decided to put it right up at the snow line where the bottom of the trees kind of meets the snow, just to give that a little bit of a frosty look. And I will also put it in the footprints on the snow. And then I'm going to add it to the bows on the reindeer, just to have it in one other place so that those look nice and festive. And that is going to finish off this card. I really think this one turned out super sweet. I love that pattern paper with the pink poinsettias, and I think these images are so super sweet. There's another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you guys. Make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already, and have your notification bell turned on if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video. All of the products that I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below, so you can check that out if you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And I will also link day 16 of the previous 2 years of holiday card series on screen right here in case you'd like to continue watching. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.